One. All right, welcome back to Humanity Ed. My name is Aaron, and I am joined by my co-host at this time,
Julie.
Hi, Julie. How are you today?
I'm great, Aaron. Thanks. How are you?
Lovely. So we talked about having an opening question here, and you had a thought about what the opening question could be. What was your thought on the opening question?
Yeah. So, kind of thinking writ large here, this whole enterprise that we're undertaking. What is the purpose of education? Are we trying to create good citizens, to foster individual geniuses?
Right. Oh boy. Okay, so you have the Plato view, which we'll get to here in a moment, an abbreviated, cribbed version of Plato's view on education before we launch into the larger Plato conversation. So this is when we were off mic, as they say in the podcast world, we were talking about how that's a podcast on its own right there. Education is very contentious these days. There's a lot of conversation about the purpose of it. And there's also the conversation about the privatization of education and how some people feel that public schools in certain places are not good quality educational facilities. And so there's a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives. And I'm not here to suggest that any of those things are the right way, the right thing, or the wrong thing. But what I am here to suggest is that education overall, we need it. We need to be educating our children. There is there is a school of thought out there where homeschooling parents, a certain segment of them, well, they're just like, we'll just let them they'll inquire. They'll ask questions, and those questions will become the education that we give our children. Inquiry-based education at its like the most literal interpretation of inquiry-based education is what some, again, I'm saying a certain segment of some homeschool parents, have turned to or talk about or promote. And I'm here to tell you, as a public school educator and someone who went through the public school education system and got a degree in how to teach in a public school system via the lens and mechanisms of English, that's a terrible idea. Inquiry-based education as a piece of the puzzle, absolutely. Inquiry is always fun. You want to know about Plato? Let's dig into Plato. You want to know about Socrates? Okay, let's talk about Socrates. Let's dig into that. But inquiry-based education, giving the child or young adult or whoever total and absolute control over the inquiry, is not a great idea, because their inquiry, their interests that they then have control over, are not actually going to lead them to critical thinking, the process of discussion, the process of engaging complex literature. If you give them the power, they're going to go for things that may not be the most helpful in creating an educated human being who is able to take on the challenges and the problems of young adulthood and eventual adulthood. Yeah, that's the one. I've watched a couple of YouTube videos on this over the last year or so, and every time I see them, I shake my head. I'm like, what? No, this is bad. Very, very bad. I want to take out a squirt bottle and squirt these people and be like, no, no, please read something else. I don't know what you're reading, but it's not good. It's not pedagogically, there it is, pedagogically solid or firm or even functional. It's, they'll just inquire and they'll ask, and then we'll learn that way. And it's like, no, there's a reason why schools have curriculum. Even charter schools have curriculum. Schools of any standing, of any use to the youth of America, they have to have curriculum. They have to have standards. There's a reason why Common Core standards came out and got massively just enforced across the country, because there was the view, and in some cases it was legit, that certain states were not, or certain communities were not holding to standards. They weren't teaching to standards. And so why Common Core became such a big deal is because we got to come up with something that everybody holds their students to. Now, each state then interprets the Common Core standards and creates their own standards, but they connect directly to the Common Core standards. This is a very long answer to your question. I'm getting there, I promise. So the deal with education is, it's not because it's mandatory, which it is. You are legally required until 16 years old. You're legally required to be in school by law, or else truancy kicks in and you got big problems and you got to go to court and deal with that. 17 in certain states, Colorado is one of them. the student can drop out at 17 and pursue their own dreams. I will tell you from experience, generally that doesn't work out very well, and you should not do that. You should either get your GED or finish your high school education or something versus just kind of going and walking in the wilderness. It's not a good idea. So the importance of education and why we have education and why we teach and why we have schools is because we need to foster in students the ability, number one, critical thinking is the biggest buzzword of all time, but it's not just a buzzword, it's a reason. If I were to give you a book, and I said, okay, Warm Bodies, we use Warm Bodies in my language arts class. I give you a book, Warm Bodies, and I just said, read it. And I didn't have you ask questions. Didn't have you write an essay. I didn't have you analyze it in any way. I just said, read it. Well, there's no education. You're just reading a book for fun. And then you put it down, you go, okay, cool, that was great. What's next? And I'm like, okay, now read this book. And I don't ask any questions. I don't make your brain think or train your brain to think. I have made a huge disservice to you. So why I hand you Warm Bodies and then I ask you questions after each chapter is, I want to know what you think, but that requires your brain to engage, to critically think of, okay, this happens to this character. What do I think about that? Why do I think about that? Why do I think that way? What's the thing here? Ooh, cool. Now you're learning. We start talking about themes. We start talking about protagonists, antagonists. Ooh, what are those big words? Well, let's talk about what those are. Connect. So, yes. What was the question? Was why education? Why schools or whatever? I think was what you asked. I'm wandering along the pathway here, because we need to. You have to learn. You have to learn to be functional. There's no way that you don't either get your GED. I would encourage you to get your public school diploma or whatever school you end up going to, charter, your choice. That's not my job here. Because there's no way that you're able to handle the rigors of the world and the challenges of the critical thinking and analysis and interpretation of the world that's in front of you without having gone through at least a high school education. That is a minimum. And I will argue that your high school diploma as a minimum, you need to augment that with an associate's, a trade school, a tech school, a college, university, community college, whatever, because the world of 2025, where we are now, there's no way you can navigate the challenges of both career and life without furthering your education beyond that high school diploma. And there's no shame in the game of just having a high school diploma. Hear me clearly, listeners. It's not my gig here. But my gig is saying, look, if you have the choice, if you have the ability now to say, I am not going to just settle for a high school diploma. I want more. I want to learn more. I want to become more knowledgeable. I want to expose myself to more interesting viewpoints or interesting things that are challenging or unique or different, or I might find a hobby through this that I like, or I might find a career that I love. Like, don't ever stop learning. Yeah. That was a very long answer to your question, which I think I lost the track of, but
it's an inspiring answer. It's a good answer, and it's an inspiring answer. And when I think about going back to Plato, and to some extent, you also made me think of another philosopher that I hope we'll talk about later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Oh,
and his notion, and his notion from his classic Emile. It is basically experiential learning and varied child or learner directed.
Yeah.
However, even Emile, the student, has a tutor.
Yes.
And, the kid may be able to go out and we can talk more about this later. The kid may be able to go out and wander in nature and is guided by his natural curiosity.
Yeah.
John Dewey said some very similar things, about 100 years later. However, even that natural curiosity, guided, unguided, it can lead to, oh, that's really cool, but I don't know how to connect these dots, or I don't know how to connect them in meaningful, impactful ways that are going to make a difference in my life and in the world around me and make me understand the world around me maybe as clearly as I could. Yeah. So what I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying...
You're wrong, Julie.
Okay.
Just kidding. I didn't mean that.
What I hear...
I love if you can't see her, but Julie was like, whoa, just kidding.
what I hear you saying is that our role as educators is to be like sort of critical thinking tour guides, you know,
Yeah.
to kind of, I mean, because it's one thing to take a self-guided tour, and I've done that many times,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate the architecture, and I like
Yeah.
looking at the cool old art. But if I have somebody who is knowledgeable, a docent or somebody who
Right.
can really explain the history and the deeper social context and meaning to me, it's going to connect to me and stay with me in a lot deeper.
So I'll give you an example. So we over the summer we went to South Carolina, and in South Carolina there's Mount Pleasant, and Mount Pleasant has the USS Yorktown CV-10, the carrier that they built right in the middle of World War II to fill the need of CV-5, which sank, and CV-10, the Yorktown, went on to sink a lot of Japanese ships, helped take out the Yamato, like a lot of crazy things, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, I get to set foot on an American, like, World War II carrier? Done, let's go. So the cool thing was there were audio tour options, but you could sign up for the captain's tour, which was like $15 more, and there was an actual guide who all their guides are veterans who had served in wherever they had served. And that experience was so encouraging and so cool because, yeah, you're listening to it and you're like, okay, cool. You hear the voice of Tom Hanks. You hear this, whatever. Okay, good, whatever. Yeah, okay, great, Tom Hanks. Thanks. No offense on Tom Hanks. Hey, Tom Hanks, come on the show. That'll never happen.
Never say never.
Never say never. Who knows? We'll get Tom Hanks. So, but listening to him tell stories of because he was a Vietnam War veteran, and him telling stories of like, yeah, no, I know what this does. I know I've been, I've seen these kinds of things. This is what I know. This is what I've heard. This is what I've whatever. Like, there's something so much more. There's more strength in the learning because it's not just listening to someone go. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, no, you've actually lived this life. Oh, I want to ask some questions. And it was cool because some of the people on the tour would ask questions. Would be like, okay, well, what does this mean? What does that do? And he's like, oh, I can tell you that. And it's so like, yeah, there's power in that role of having someone guiding you through it and kind of not forcing you down a certain path, but saying, okay, let's talk about that. Let's figure that out. Similar to what I do with Warm Bodies is I will say, okay, when we get to the final essay, which is an analysis of literature, we only use the book. We don't do research because we're trying to figure it out straight out the gate what we're doing. And I will say, okay, cool, here's your book. And I say, I have a couple of choices for you of how you can view this. I say you can look at themes, and themes are traditionally about the human experience, or we can do some character growth analysis. But if you have a third idea, I am open to it. Let's go. And more often than not, the students have chosen one of those two things. They've chosen the themes, or they've chosen the character growth. Sometimes they choose something different. It's like, okay, and then we talk about that. Well, why? How is that going to work? What's that going to look like when we analyze this essay? And so to your point, having a docent, having somebody who's like, okay, that's a great idea, but let's make sure we're doing this in a way that's going to be effective in the learning, but also in the analyzing and all the things. And so I think we talk a lot about sage on the stage versus guide on the side. The sage on the stage model is what a lot of high schools in this country use, and no shame in that game. Our local high school does that as well, and I'm not like, oh my gosh, it's the wrong way to do it. There's a lot of ways to do sage on the stage well, and there's a lot of ways to do guide on the side well as well. And at our alternative high school we teach at, guide on the side is more of what we do, with a little bit of sage on the stage too, like, because we'll do direct instruction, we'll do that. So I think you're right. I think there's a model for education. The model we have now in some ways is outdated, which is a whole other conversation. So yeah, when we come back, we're going to tackle Plato. We'll talk about Plato through the lens of education. We'll talk about Plato a little bit more, and I'm sure we'll expand on this conversation too. So yeah, welcome to HumanityED. It's the second episode of our podcast. We'll be right back after this intro. I was gonna say message. We're not sponsored. Sponsor us, somebody. Earl Grey, sponsor us. Earl Grey tea. We're drinking Earl Grey right now.
Go Earl Grey.
Wow. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Humanity Ed. My name is Aaron, and my co-host at this time is
Julie.
Yay. All right, so did we fully answer the question that we posed as an opener? Did we exhaust all our options, or is there more to kind of cogitate on?
I don't think these kind of questions are ever. I don't think we can or necessarily should ever reach an end. I think it needs to be something living and evolving, and responsive to what we're actually dealing with in the moment, what education can and should be. I will say something that you did when you talked about your experience this summer. And you mentioned how it made such a difference for you instead of just listening to the self-guided Tom Hanks, great voice, great actor, but listening to him in your headphones going through the tour, and then actually hearing the firsthand experiences of the veteran who served and and could bring that personal subjective context in a way. There's another issue there that I want to just think about for a minute, because, and we could do a whole other podcast on that, because
so many podcasts.
So it at a very in a very kind of writ large epistemological sense, you're talking about objectivity versus subjectivity.
Right. What
I think about in my background in history and philosophy is the notion of what are we going to count as knowledge? Are we going to count and value the experience and the perceptions of the individual? And that's when we get into like oral histories and narratives, because I very much feel like even if they may be in some sense inaccurate, those historical subjective accounts have deep meaning, and that historical color, or that color of knowledge that you get, it's not just being a guide on the side that is giving you straight objective facts. We're always, as teachers, we are subjective people. We do have opinions, we do have biases, we do have experiences, and and that's a whole other question. Should we or should we not, and to what extent should we let those color our interactions with our students? But also,
I have feelings on that one, but I'll continue.
No, and one more thing, and then I want to hear what you have to say, because I think you got a lot to say. But also, what should
all day long, Julie? I have so many things, so much to say.
What should we value more? Because Plato, when he answered this question, it was the state. We value the individual. The individual exists to serve the state, and education exists to mold the individual into what they need to be to serve the state. Okay, so it's very much, and by the state, I don't just necessarily mean a political body. Of course, I do mean that, but I also mean the greater society, the sort of greater good versus the individual. So, your thoughts?
So I was an early adopter of social media, of Twitter, back when it was called Twitter. Now it's called X.com or whatever. And there, in the early days of Twitter, and then even in the middle ages of Twitter, if you will, there were a lot of teachers on Twitter who were just freely espousing their politics, right, left, middle of the road, or whatever. Like, it was all over the place. And it got some teachers in trouble, because there is a significant feeling among the public, mind you, the public who pays their taxes, votes for whether or not we get funding on special mill election. Like, the public has considerable power over what we as educators in the public system do, because if we go to them for money, or we go to them for, hey, we have this need to fund the thing, do you agree with it? And they as a group can say yes or no. And so I'm always mindful of the perception of the public, because right, wrong, or indifferent, they are a major deciding factor in what we do in the public school system. And that is a thing that I'm always mindful of, because they pay our salaries. We are paid through property taxes, the taxes and all that. Like, all that money is pooled in a system, both federally and stately and locally, into our salaries and our schools, and they pay to power our buildings, they pay to supply our computers. There is an extraordinary amount of services that are given to us as teachers through the sacrifice and giving of the community at large. So I say all of that because there have been examples on Twitter and now X.com and now on TikTok where teachers have come out and said things that in the public's view were inappropriate or not acceptable to be espoused by a teacher, by a public school teacher. And they ran the gamut of political, religious, all the kinds of things. My personal perspective, this is where I'm sitting. I haven't decided where I stand. I'm getting closer to where I stand. I will say this. I have long stood on the principle of I do not teach or preach or state a political message for my classroom. And at no point in my career have I ever been like, yes, this is a political statement and you need to know about it. Partially because I'm language arts. It's different with social studies because there's social studies is politics is baked in, like that's part of the package.
No, we can't avoid it.
You can't go into surgery and try and pull that out. But I think the idea of there's been a conversation over the years that teaching is political, so we should be talking about politics with our kids, no matter what subject we teach. Was the overriding message for many years, and I'm sure it's still the message in some parts of the Twitter and the social media. I don't believe that. And the reason why is that I am there, as we've talked about, to be a guide, to be a docent, to be the person who guides that conversation. So if a student says, well, I believe that Donald Trump is the right man for the job. Okay, awesome. Now, do I inject my personal belief on that subject? No, because it's not it's not the job. Because now if I take a position as their teacher, be it pro or con to that statement, I've now inserted myself into a situation where now my additional perspective is going to color or affect the conversation as it goes forward. Versus if they say, I believe Donald Trump is the right president for the right time, and I say, okay, cool, why? Let's talk about that. And being very clear, like, I'm not saying he's right or wrong. That's not my job. My job is to actually, okay, let's unpack that. Let's unpack why you believe that, and let's unpack some facts and figures and some information. And not approaching that conversation with either I want to shut them down, I want them to be wrong, I want them to be right. Just going, okay, let's objectively view the conversation. Let's engage with the information we have relevant to your claim. It's a very logical Spock-like argument, and that's where I come from, because I'm not a Kirk. I'm more of a Picard, but I'm very much Spock in these kind of situations. It's like, okay, let's talk about that. Let's examine the ins and the outs of it. I think in social studies it's a different world, and because I don't teach it, I can't really say that's what I would do because I'm not a social studies teacher. But I'm also very mindful that, living in whatever community we live in. So before I lived in a very purple community with, very mixed political conversations down in Denver, Centennial, Littleton Highlands Ranch area-ish. So very diverse political thought there. Out here in rural Colorado, it trends more conservative. And that's not just rural Colorado, that's any rural area, because that's what you find when you deal with agriculture, you deal with industry, you deal with a lot of this population. That is where it trends politically, because that tends to, I'm not saying it absolutely is, but it tends to align more with conservative and quote unquote Republican views when it comes to industry, agriculture, and all that kind of stuff, because there's more of a connection there with that political piece of things. And so living in that community where we're a larger conservative part of the community, there is a liberal segment of our community here, but I'm also recognizing that's, again, you've got two perspectives, well, probably more than two, but you've got two main perspectives on things and how things should go. And finding a way to navigate that is important, because again, I will make the case from every mountaintop as long as I live, the community funds us, and if we come out and we say something, or a video gets recorded of us saying something in the classroom that's not it's one way or the other, this is what you have to be, and people are like, whoa, what are you doing telling my kid how to live, how to believe, that's not really cool. Then they have long memories, and they'll remember, oh, I remember that time when that teacher did that thing, and oh man, they're asking for money. I'm not going to give them money. They don't respect my views enough to allow it to be engaged with through logical conversation. Because if the kid goes home and says, hey, I talked about Donald Trump at school today, and the parent goes, oh, what'd your teacher say? The kid's going to have to say, well, he just asked me questions, and he asked me to kind of go through it logically, and we went through and we looked at facts and figures and statistics and everything, and we didn't get finished, but I found some cool things, and it was a good conversation, and he didn't push me either way. He wanted me to work through it and figure it out, and he helped me kind of sort through the facts and the figures. He didn't say, oh, look at that proves it. Okay, we're done. It was more of that conversation. My confidence in my ability as a teacher, that's where I want to be. That's where I want to land. I want to land in a place where I'm able to have that conversation without making them decide or telling them what to think or how to think. Well, how to think. We want them to think critically, but I don't want to tell them what to think or what to believe, because that's not the gig of a public school teacher, in my opinion. Now, there are plenty of competing opinions out there on the social medias about that whole idea, but I don't. And notwithstanding, like, my perspective is built on 43 years of experience. They are at 16, 17, 18 years old. They are still developing. My ideas when I was 18 are not the ideas of what I am 43 now. To be very transparent, when I was 18, I'd voted the Democrat ticket. That's just what happened. And many years happened, and I changed my political perspective, and eventually I went independent. And I was like, you know what? I don't particularly like that label of either party. I'm going independent, and we're just gonna free range this. And I've found more comfort in that piece, because I don't have to be like, oh, well, I'm going to vote for this one or this one. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to vote what I feel critically thinking through the legislation, the candidates, and all that stuff. What do I think? Who do I think is the best thing, or what do I think is the best? Anyway, so your question of, do you politics in the classroom, like all that kind of stuff, like I'm okay if a student brings it up. Absolutely, let's have that conversation. But let's be wise. Let's be smart about this. Let's dig into the intellectual conversation versus the emotional conversation, because politics in 2025 is very emotional. There's a lot there, and so figuring out how to navigate that is important without making a student feel like they're wrong or they're right. I'm not here to tell them, you believe the right thing, kid. Huh? No, that's not. So, but there've been teachers through the power of YouTube and social media and Instagram and Twitter and TikTok they've been that way. And so people's view of teachers, right, wrong, or indifferent, perception equals reality, right? People's perspective of teachers is then colored by, oh, well, I've seen teachers do this, and this is why teachers are terrible, and this is why teacher unions are terrible, blah, 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 because what they've been presented with is that, versus what is actually more than likely happening in most classrooms is the contemplation, the critical thinking, the logical examination, the conversational piece of let's explore that, let's unpack that, let's see what that does. Once again, a long answer to your short question, but I'm sure you have something to say in response to that, because you've got that look on your face like, I have more to say. So, Julie, give us more. Tell us everything.
Okay, everything. No,
we don't have time for that.
Well, and I don't have I would not even. Yeah,
right.
But something that I listening to you and
you were taking notes over there. I noticed that.
Just thinking a little bit. Okay, so I completely not only understand but also agree with your position that we are, as educators, it is a privilege, and it is something that we are given the responsibility. We are endowed with this responsibility, and it is a public service. Yeah. And if we step out of the bounds of that role, if it seems like we are not taking the feelings and the welfare of our larger community, including our families and other values, into account, then we're more acting as propagators of propaganda than as educators. And so I think there is a fine line there. That said, I really did appreciate what you also said about the way you guide your students through conversations, whether it be warm bodies or political statements that they make. because it does tie back to, of course, Plato's teacher, Socrates, and the Socratic method of clarifying your thought for critical thinking, which is important. But here's my follow-up question to you, because we teach in a school that has adopted this, I guess I want to call it not just social emotional learning curriculum, but also this kind of, this used to be a dirty word in the 80s in education, values. I taught at a school where I was told when I was teaching world history that I could not use the words value, ethics, or morals in the classroom. And that's when I was trying to teach about Asian history. And it's just sort of like, so do I skip over Buddha and Confucianism and all of these kind of things and not go there? Here's the thing. We, in our own school, we have these social contract posters up in our classrooms. Those are values. We are teaching values. We are. So the philosopher Judith Butler said, everything is political. You can't get away from politics. Everything is political, and
especially in 2025.
And you know, and
Judith, save us, please. Somehow.
I don't think you want Judith to save you, but but
are you saying Judith and I wouldn't get along?
No, Aaron, I don't think you would actually.
Oh,
but
I get along with almost anybody.
You might actually be intrigued by her and interested in her, and that's a whole other conversation.
I'll have to dig into her history then.
But I will tell you this. I think that when we're not going to talk about, obviously we're not moral relativists in school. We actually do.
Oh, Judith is still alive.
Of course.
Come on the podcast, Judith. Let's go.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to her about some of her gender trouble issue.
I'm reading. Interesting.
Gender and subordination was a whole part of my dissertation.
Okay.
But anyway, getting back to this conversation, so we are not values neutral.
Right.
We are not moral relativists. We do teach values, but our values are very broad. I mean, respect, kindness, integrity, no gaslighting. I can't even remember all of the words on the social contract that we generate with the kids. It's through a sort of democratic process where we all have input together, and we set the guidelines for what our community is going to be. Yeah. So that said, when you come up beside a kid as the guide on the side, and and you're helping them clarify their thinking by asking these questions about, it's not value neutral. It's never value neutral. Yeah. However, it's also in terms of what we're trying to do, and I'm thinking about Plato's allegory of the cave and what it means to lead somebody in the light. It's also not directive to the point that this is the right pool of water to drink from, or this is what you need to believe. Right. But more, why do you believe what you believe, and where is that taking you? What is that going to give you?
What is feeding that pool of water?
There you go. Exactly.
Where is that? Is it coming from a poisoned well? Is it sour? Is it expired? Or is it fresh water? Is it water that will sustain you? Or is it water that will slowly cripple you, or slowly impact your brain, your thinking, poison your mind almost, if you will? Because I think, there's no one answer. And to kind of backpedal a little bit, you talked about how it is not our job to give them that values. We aren't there to the values are not one set of values. We don't teach one set of values. But what we do as educators is help students, again, not through indoctrination, not through directing them and telling them. We help them find what their values are. They are not our values, but they are the values of what they will eventually become and construct as their young adulthood selves when they graduate. Those values will probably change from freshman to sophomore to junior to senior year, and that's pretty normal. Like, that happens. Like, you start your freshman year and you value, I want to have all my friends, and then you find out, man, half of my friends are like traitors and they're talking about me behind my back. Wow, I don't value a large group of friends anymore. I am now going to have just 3 friends because I trust only these 3 people. And that value then changes, and then you change your value of how you value community and what you value in your community, and then what you value in the people around you. So in a lot of ways, I don't think it's in a lot of ways, in a very straightforward way, we teach kids values, but we don't teach them what we think. We teach them how to think and how to evaluate those values and make those values their own as they grow up and go forward.
So can I ask a couple of follow-up
You
questions?
absolutely may, Julie. Let's go.
Okay. So when I think about leading, but also not being overly directive in where you're leading them to, just clarifying their own positions.
Yeah.
What if, because this has happened to me as a teacher, and I'm sure it's happened to you, what if a student actually turns to you and says, Aaron, what do you think?
So I've had this happen. What I will say is I say, okay, here's the deal. I will tell you what I think, but I'm going to tell you why I think it. Because I think that's important. Because you shouldn't, if a kid says, because we've had, again, very limited conversations. Like, it hasn't gone full blown, we're doing a deep dive into this. Where we've had conversations about religion. The student's like, oh, well, I'm a Christian. And so what are you? I was like, oh, I'm a Christian as well. But this is the kind of Christian, this is my denomination and what I've been through, what I know. And so those questions are very easy to answer because I don't answer it with like, oh, well, I believe that. I just like, okay, well, this is what I believe and why I believe it. I don't generally answer questions about who I voted for because that is, in 2025, a pretty contentious conversation. My answer to that question would be like, you know what? That's not something that I usually share, and I don't feel comfortable sharing it because I'm not going to ask who you voted for either, because that's a private matter. That's a personal matter, and that's something that I have decided that I decide on. I don't tell my wife how to vote. I don't tell anybody else how to vote. That's a personal matter. I don't post on my Facebook about voting or who to vote for. I generally don't engage. And I think that and that may be what is the difference maker for me, because there are plenty of my contemporaries who have made political statements on their social media and have said, if you don't vote for this one or that one, like, yeah, and I'm just like, that's not the gig. Your vote is sacred. Your vote is a privilege that you have to exercise, and I treat it as holy. And when we talk to swerve into religion with our state conversation, but like, it's a holy contract between me and the state. They give me the ability to voice my opinion and voice my thoughts on where the country should go. That's a discussion between me and the state. Similar to in religion, you have to discuss discussion between you and your God. That's where my head is, and that's probably closer to where I stand, because I don't feel that it's appropriate within the setting of the classroom to answer that question, unless obviously it's a specific, like civics, like if there's a conversation about voting and you as a social studies teacher, let me try that again, feel comfortable in having that conversation and opening up that discussion, contentious as it may or may not be. But again, if a student asks me what I believe, I'll tell them within the respect, like within the boundaries of like, hey, this is what I feel comfortable sharing, and here's why I believe that thing.
It is. We have such an awesome responsibility as educators, and we do have such an influence. And I really, as a parent, also, I know that I wouldn't want to feel like a teacher was undermining what I was teaching my kids. I've had that happen in the past, and it's made me furious. And at the same time, I also can see that if you have these conversations with students about your personal beliefs or whatever, you are wielding an influence on them, whether you realize it or not. And so I think it's a very, you're right, I think, to set those boundaries, in my personal opinion, because it is not, we try to treat our students with, we want to have reciprocity, we want to have respect, but as another philosopher, Martin Buber, said, even when you're doing those I, thou, mutual, respectful
Yeah.
relationships, a teacher mentor to student mentee relationship, it's not totally balanced
Yeah.
because of the power
Yeah.
dynamic there, and you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
That actually leads me into my next question for you.
Hit me. Let's go.
Okay, so something that Plato actually also talks about in his Republic is the need for censorship in education because
I was wondering when we were going to get to this one.
because we are educating people to fulfill their roles for the good of the state. And so we need music, we need
Yeah.
art,
Yeah.
we need literature that inspires virtue, that inspires piety, that
Yeah.
inspires the kind of citizen people in their respective
Yeah.
roles that we want them to be in. And
Yeah.
to some extent, it's not only censorship, it's also controlling what information we give them,
Yeah.
because we have to script the narrative so they
Right.
can grow up to fulfill
Right.
their roles, because if we just give them all the information,
Right.
they may go off role.
Right.
What are your responses to that as an English teacher?
So, oh boy. All right, well, let's start from one end of this. Let's go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Let's talk about North Korea. Because information in North Korea is tightly controlled. There is a state message. There is a state theme. There is a state, the state is all or nothing. You are absolutely, the supreme leader is God. And you will hear no information about anything other than the state and the state of the state, which is all sunshine and roses, and there's no chance of the lack of food being happening that you see in your communities. No, that's wrong. It's everything's fine, dear leader. That is the end of the censorship that I never want to be in, I never want to exist in, never want to support, never want to be okay with, because that is an absolute tyrannical, fascist state. And there is no arguing around that. If anybody out there tries to argue that North Korea is actually the best place in the world, I need you to go see somebody and get that head checked out, because no. And it's very rare that I'm be like, nope, not a thing. I very rarely do that, because again, we just talked about critical thinking and being open to all conversations. There are a few conversations where I'm like, nope, not going down that road today. So on the spectrum of censorship, yeah, North Korea takes the cake. China is another one. China is very, very censorship heavy. Their control is a little wobbly recently, but they still watch everything. They know everything. Everyone who's on TikTok right now, all of your data that you do on TikTok is seen and engaged with and played with by the Chinese government. Get off TikTok as soon as you can. So that's on one side, right? On the other side is everything is free. You can get anything you want. I think I will never say censorship is the answer. I will say limits, I think, are important. So this leads us into a conversation we talk about, in a lot of recent news in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, more recently now, there have been parent groups who have gone into libraries and been like, this book isn't appropriate for a 5th grader, it needs to get out. Now, objectively, looking at some of that content that has been highlighted, yeah, if I was a parent and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what my 5th grader's reading, I'm not sure that's an appropriate content level, and I'm not sure we're ready to have those conversations yet as parents and kid. Let's see about moving that up into the high school possible level. So I'm never going to say, no, book's out. I'm always going to say, can we evaluate the level at which that book is accessible? Mm-hmm. Because again, your conversation about we are providing a service to parents and kids, and that service is predicated on the trust that we have with them, that we are going to use our judicious knowledge and critical thinking to evaluate curriculum and present to them, their students, appropriate curriculum for their level. You would never go to a 1st grader and say, hey, have you heard about the Holocaust? Not an appropriate conversation, not appropriate curriculum. You're going to scare the poor child. They're going to be reduced to tears. They're going to go home. Ah! Not okay. You just can start that conversation probably with maybe 6th graders at a limited exposure with Lois Lowry's book, A Number of the Stars. And you can start with Anne Frank, and a lot of that conversation can happen in the middle school setting. But you never want to go full into, hey, by the way, here's some things, the awful, horrifying things. No, you level it. You say, okay, we start freshman year with this. We do this in the sophomores, and we level it so when they get to a seat by the senior level, they have an understanding of this subject that is well thought out, well taught, well informed, that it's got information on all the occurrences and all the pieces. That's where I stand. I'm not an advocate of censorship. I'm an advocate of let's level it and let's make sure it's appropriate for the grade level that we're proposing to present this information to and to teach it to. I think censorship it's the big ugly, is the boogeyman. Every couple of months, or it feels like more recently every couple of months, but every year or so, there's always that push. Oh, banned books week. These are the books that have been banned. And I think it's, so like recently, there was a situation in Florida, like in the last couple of days, where this California senator was like, they're banning the book, The Diary of Anne Frank, in Florida. And people were like, that's weird. Let's go look at the website. They pull it up. Nope, it's on the list. Okay, well, what's going on? There's a graphic novel about Anne Frank that has been removed from the bookshelves in the libraries in that school. The reason is because the book's content, the graphic novel's content, which is separate from the Diary of Anne Frank, it's an adaptation or whatever, suggests that Anne Frank, her sexuality tended to be a lesbian. Mm-hmm. There's absolutely no proof of any of that in any documents, in any conversations, in anything. But this graphic novel decided to take that direction. Great, good. You can decide to present alternative interpretations of Anne Frank as a 15-year-old girl. I don't know how I'm okay with that. Whatever, here we are. So, but the problem is that it was like the big old boogeyman. Oh, it's censorship is happening. Oh no, be aware, be afraid. It's the whole thing. And people are like, no, look at the website. Anne Frank's on the reading list, and they have a whole curriculum. Like, it's there. What are you talking about? So that's my response. Kind of my couching of my not a censorship guy, but I think censorship is the boogeyman in a lot of ways. Versus, hey, we actually do cover this. We just cover it more appropriately, and we're not going to put on our shelves a book that really almost, again, this is my perspective, really disrespects Anne Frank and her father and the story. There's no evidence. They're like, oh, well, she wrote about this. It's like, yeah, but is that the story? Is the point? Is the point to decide to theorize the gender of a Holocaust victim and make that the point versus the point that she died in a Holocaust? That's
so you're talking about co-opting her story for an agenda.
Yeah. So it's like that, but that's the thing is like every time the censorship conversation. So we tweeted it out. Of course, people started tweeting, oh my gosh. And so by the time that message got halfway around the world, to borrow the not attributed to actually Winston Churchill quote, who knows where it actually came from? You know, by the time a lie is halfway around the world, the truth hasn't gotten its pants on. There was no correcting it. So there are people out there, I'm sure right now, 24 hours plus removed from the event of the tweet, who believe that the state of Florida, because there are political perspectives on Ron DeSantis and the whole state of Florida, and those are feelings and those are ideas, and there's a lot of facts out there that would kind of, they wouldn't negate, but they would kind of pacify and center what conversation is about Florida politically in a middle of the road kind of understanding versus the blah, blah on the left and the right. Anyway, we're sliding into territory that sometimes can get me into trouble. Anyway, so my point is, censorship is a lot of times the boogeyman because people view, well, you've taken that book off the shelf of the library. You're censoring it. Well, no, it's you can go on Amazon and buy it for your kid if you'd like. Bring it into your home. But we as a community who serves all the parents, all the students, we have to come to an understanding of what is acceptable for that entire population, and will present a objective, focused and strong view, like strong conversation, versus a book that really doesn't have any historical context, doesn't really add anything to the conversation, and is just salacious. What's the point? There is no point. It's an interesting conversation, but it's not going to happen in the classroom because that's not what we're teaching. We're teaching about the lessons of Anne Frank and the lessons of being othered and the lessons of being like all the things that are concrete facts about that historical period and those events. And we're not going to get distracted by this book that says that this is a thing that happened, we think it happened, but it really didn't, and we're just playing it, people's censorship. It's not censorship. The book was removed because it didn't have any point. Like, Diary of Anne Frank is still taught. They still taught, like, it's... But that's, I think, the issue with the larger word of censorship. Now, there are obviously... You're not going to find the Anarchist Cookbook on a library shelf. That one probably is censored and banned from access in public school libraries, because that would be an inappropriate piece of content for students to have access to. Because once it's in the library, that's permissed. You are saying we're okay with this book. Everyone should be able to get a hold of it and read it. Okay, we are, again, that contract with our community, that social contract with our community that is often unspoken. We will put what is reasonable and everyone's okay with and everyone wants to have access to. We will do that for the community. And I think a lot of the recent challenges to books is like, well, is that a reasonable book to have on the shelf for access to anybody? Or is it reasonable for elementary? Or is it reasonable for middle school? Or is it reasonable for high school? Where does that reasonability, where do we find that meter of reasonability? And I don't have an area where I'm standing on that right now. I don't have this is what I think and how we should do it. And I have a solution. I don't. I would have to literally dig into this issue and really go after it to figure out where I stand specifically on a lot of this. So I think censorship is, I don't want to say it's a misnomer, because that would suggest that I'm just discounting your question. I think that censorship can be used in a darker sense of, well, we're just not going to have this content talked about. We're gonna sideline it. We're not going to talk about it. No. And sometimes in some communities that can be used for bad. That the overcorrection becomes a weapon, and that is, censorship should never be used as a weapon. In my opinion, it should always be used as a contemplation. Okay. Should we have this book on the shelves? Let's evaluate it. Let's go through the pros and the cons. Again, it's that logical Spock argument. Okay, what does this book contain that is objectionable? Okay, this, and that. Okay, well, what does it contain that's good? Okay, this, that. Okay, well, where do we put this book in relation to who gets to read it? Well, this stuff is not appropriate for a first grader. Okay, is it appropriate for a fifth grader? Maybe sixth grader. Okay, maybe sixth, seventh. Okay, let's look at the middle school. Okay, maybe it'll fit there. Maybe eighth grade. Okay, maybe put the eighth grade section. Okay, that's good. We'll do it. Job done. But you've evaluated, you've examined, you've basically figured it out, and you've placed it there, and you have your reasons for it being there. Versus, no, we just bought a book and put it on the shelf. Don't do that, librarians. I love you, librarians. You're my heroes. But read the room that we're in right now in 2025, and know where we're at, because it can lead to some really unpleasant experiences that could have been prevented if we had evaluated and had some kind of paper trail of like, yeah, this is why I put the book on the shelf. This is where it's located. This is who can access it. Here's the why. Do we need to reevaluate the why? Cool, let's reevaluate it. Let's do it as a community versus yelling at people on school boards. Again, the long question to your short answer.
That's okay. I love it. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not going to be able to respond to everything you just said. But I mean, just off the top of my head, a few thoughts. I mean, this question of who should get to decide, that's really interesting. Is it a community-wide discussion?
Yeah.
Is it by a majority, or can one parent who objects make that decision? I will tell you that a good friend of mine, well, I cherish his memory now, Rudolfo Anaya. He was actually a grandfather figure to my kids.
Okay.
And when his novel Bless Me Ultima was banned, it actually increased the sales of his book. So it's from an author's point of view, it's like, yeah, ban me, go ahead. I mean, which is just, and if you've ever read Bless Me Ultima, it's just sort of like you go, what did you object to in this novel? And I mean, I did read what the issue was, but to return to Plato for a second. I mean, when you opened up with the examples of North Korea and China, that is one of the things, if you read like Karl Popper's critique of Plato, I mean, he is accused of this idea of supporting fascist regimes, or if not supporting, because, my gosh, sorry, totally misquoted that because he lived like, what, 3,500 years ago.
Right.
But
I don't know if they knew the word fascism at that point.
But inspiring,
Yeah.
you know, maybe being as a kind of a blueprint. But what Plato wrote was a thought experiment for
Yeah.
the ideal state. He did not write a how to,
Right.
authoritative guide
Right.
for education. He
The
was
Dummy's Guide too.
exactly. But he was concerned with how do we shape moral
Yeah.
citizens. And as teachers, here's the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going all the way back to Plato. So obviously we have got, what, 5,000, 6,000 years of going back further, like to
Mm-hmm.
the Epic of Gilgamesh. We have millennia of human history and
Mm-hmm.
culture. We have students for, what is it, 100, how many school days do we have? 180?
180 days.
180 days. We and very limited time for 54 minutes a class
Yeah.
period, sometimes less. We can't teach all of the world's output
Yeah.
of culture and creativity.
Yeah.
So we are constantly making subjective decisions, but hopefully they are subjective decisions that are asking those deeper questions about why are we going here? Who created these standards? And your
Yeah.
point, going back to the beginning of conversation, this is why we need standards. We need a group of us, because it's more than any one of us can take on,
Yeah.
to look at this and reevaluate it from time to time. This is where we want to go in terms of our educational journey. We are educating students for what? To be responsible, to be well-rounded, to be able to be informed, to be able to be positive actors in their communities. And what do they need to be armed with to do those things, and also to have a good life and to be self-supporting.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting question about how teachers and how school boards and how parents and how all of us together make these decisions about what we're going to teach.
Yeah.
On a very personal, if I can bring
go
it
ahead.
back for just a second, and then I'll stop for a minute and maybe return to another question for you.
Sure.
So I texted you earlier this week because I'm building out my music history
Yeah.
class, and there was a composer that I decided to leave out because of his Nazi sympathies, and did not.
Good old Wagner.
Okay, so you know what? And my feeling was students can learn about Wagner on their own.
So
This is just a light introduction.
Let's pause for a second. Who composed the Wedding March?
Are
Wagner. Isn't it
okay,
Wagner?
Okay, well, are you? I when I think of the Wedding March, I'm thinking of Vivaldi. You know,
Didn't
which
Wagner
one?
do it of
The ring thing? Yeah.
Hold on. Wagner Wedding. Yeah. Wagner's is the Wedding March.
Yeah, that's the because I didn't get married to that. Was that the traditional? Here comes.
Here we go.
the
Are you ready?
bride? Yeah.
It's going to get loud. Probably. Maybe. I don't know. Hold on. Nope, that's the wrong one. I can't find the button. Nope. Hold on.
You're in a 747 cockpit controller there.
I know. There's a button that I can do it. I just got to figure out where it is. Input USB. I don't know where that button is. No, that's not the button. That's not the button. Okay. No. Button.
Because here's Mendelssohn's Wedding March.
Hold on. Let me. Oh, I know why it's here. This is why it's going. So yeah, it's
That one. Okay, yeah. Okay, so
the
yeah.
tradition. The traditional Wedding March.
Okay, so that yeah.
So that is the march that most people are familiar with. What I didn't know until recently that was Wagner.
Yeah.
And that we kind of, as a culture, looked past the actual artist, and we're like, oh, well, this is the traditional wedding march, and it's like, oh dear, oh
Okay.
no.
So, you know, this whole question of separating the artist, the creator, from their beliefs, from their ideas,
Yeah.
it gets into a really sticky territory. So I told you that I made that decision that, you know what, they can be exposed to Wagner later. I'm personally not comfortable with that for me.
Yeah.
And but that is a very personal decision,
Yeah.
just like I'm also making the personal decision when I'm composing the unit on the 1990s, early 2000s, and we're looking at rap music to exclude a lot of violent, what I consider rap with a lot of profanity in it, and lyrics that are very derogatory towards women, debasing women. And it is not debasing culture. It's not it's not my critique of creativity or culture. It's just my personal comfort level with that, and including that in the curriculum. Now, does that mean that students may not listen to that music in their headsets on their own? Absolutely not. They're free to do that, and it's just sort of like that. But I don't feel like that's not in my purview, and just.
So let's be clear about Wagner very quickly. He did not live, obviously, in the modern age. He was 1800s to whatever. He lived 1813 to 1883. The issue with Wagner was on anti-Semitism. It was not he was not a Nazi, because the Nazis did not exist in the 1813 to 1883. However, Wagner did exhibit anti-Semitic conversations and pieces and parts. The Nazis appropriated Wagner. And that became a larger part of the issue is that, because I'm looking at the Wikipedia and there's a whole, they used a lot of his music at events, but interestingly enough, the Nazi hierarchy as a whole did not share Hitler's enthusiasm for Wagner. So it's one of those things where you have to take a step back and go, okay, where is the root for this? And I think to attack Wagner, which I don't like him any more than anybody else does.
I'm not attacking him.
Well, just being real about him, I guess, because he absolutely was not a good guy overall with the anti-Semitic stuff. But I think it's interesting that because of that influence, people, and I would absolutely, I don't think we played Wagner at our wedding. I don't think we played the wedding march at our wedding. I have to remember what we did, because I think at that point I had found out, I was like, oh, this is not good. So there's no judgment on this. The judgment is maybe choose another song for your y'all's wedding. And people's wedding, to the greater public at large, if you're listening, maybe choose a different wedding song for the bride.
But I got, it did make me a little uncomfortable, like I told you, because I thought I was getting into cancel culture or kind of my own sort of censorship.
Yeah.
And where do we, and this is just a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Where do we draw do we draw the line, but like, what is our responsibility, and where are we maybe stepping out of our lane? Like, when I think about, for example, Sherman Alexie, and I decide not to teach Sherman Alexie anymore.
That was a contentious argument on social media for a year plus. I've never taught him in my classrooms. And to your point, it is a very hard question to answer, because especially with literature. I mean, there are plenty of people that we study in literature who, through the lens of 2025, are absolutely problematic. There's a lot of conversation, and there was. So we're going to swerve into the canon conversation for a moment. I can't remember we talked about this in the previous episode, but there's a lot of conversation about canon and what's in canon, what we shouldn't have in canon, and there's an alternative canon and all this other canon. I will always advocate that we should never throw out the canon, quote unquote. So, like, when we study our founding fathers, we do through American literature, we have a class, American Literature Part 1 and Part 2 is the junior level course. And we look at Thomas Jefferson, we look at George Washington, we look at John Adams, we look at James Madison, we look at these guys. And we have to accept that they had slaves, that was a part of that world. Do we like it? No, absolutely not. We condemn it in the most absolute possible, strongest language. But we have to acknowledge that that's a thing. Historically, that was life. Does it make it okay? Absolutely not. But we can't take a surgeon's scalpel and try and remove that history, because that's a part of who we are. The America that we know today came from the struggle of the colonies, the eventual the fight against the tyranny of the king, and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those things were born out of a desire for freedom, and that freedom that did come to slaves and did come to women, the power to vote, the suffragettes fight. Like, the idea behind the, what is it? It's in the, I think it's in the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union. Never said it was perfect. Never said we had it figured out. But every step of the way, every day, every moment is our journey towards a more perfect union. The decisions of the Supreme Court in a lot of the recent years has been edging us closer to that more perfect union. And there's plenty to disagree with the Supreme Court, but guess what? They're the Supreme Court. This is what the system is. It's a beautiful system that, yeah, has it been used for bad? Absolutely. But has it been used for good? Absolutely. There has been incredible victories for every piece and part of this country and people in it over the years that have come through the Supreme Court, that have come through the legislature, that have come through. So to hear people say, "Oh, we can't have that," I was like, what we have to acknowledge our history, but we don't have to make it like a negative ride. Just be like, yeah, this was the story. If this was to happen in 2025, absolutely, we would condemn it. We'd throw it out the door. We wouldn't let it back in. But in 1776, in 1800, in 1850, this was the reality. And I guarantee you, if we were transported back to 1776, 1780, 1885, like, we would be like, whoa! We could not handle ourselves. I guarantee you. We'd be like, this is all wrong. What's wrong with these people? Blah, 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 blah. Well, that's the life they had. That's the world that it was. And our history and our literature and our documentation, all that, it's a product of history. And so, yes, is there literature that's problematic? Absolutely. Is there literature that like pushed the line? Absolutely. We studied that in our American literature class. There are people who stepped up and wrote stories that challenged the narrative, that pushed the line. There are stories of, like, a particular one slave who was given an education and became the first female African-American writer. In times of slavery, she was given that opportunity to do something. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. And the moves and the shakes and the changes that have happened since that time, again, we're still on that journey to a more perfect union. Are we doing everything right today? No. Will we do everything right tomorrow? No. But we're going to do our best to try. And there's no absolutes in this world, be it political, whatever. There's just no absolutes. You can't live in a world of absolutes. You have to live in a world of, we're going to figure out a way through this, and we gotta negotiate and navigate this without trying to like set it in concrete, because nothing's set in concrete. If you set something in concrete, it's going to take a heck of a lot of time to undo it. So I wandered again with that question, but I'm okay with it. I'm just explaining. Our listeners might be like, how long is this going on to answer?
I think you answered it for me, because I think really kind of at the root of my question was, who should be the arbiter of truth and of knowledge. And it sounds like you're saying it's all of us.
Yeah, it is. Because here's the thing, like, I've had this conversation with people before, specifically about hate speech, right? So there's been a lot of conversation about we need to ban hate speech. And I had this conversation with a fellow teacher a couple of years ago. I can't remember who it was, but and I kind of turned to him and said, who decides what's hate speech? Well, okay, so, but that's their view. What if my view is different of what hate speech is? Well, I don't, but who's the arbiter? Who's the decider? When we put it down in the law, and then in 6 months, all of a sudden, that definition has changed in the eye of the public, of the culture of hate speech. What do we do then? Well, this is why it's important that we understand what we're doing before we do it. Because if we're going to call something hate speech, okay, now we're going to criminalize hate speech. There's a freedom of speech, the beauty of the First Amendment, right? Free speech, the power of free. It is a uniquely American ideal. There are not a lot of countries in this world right now who have an absolute free speech piece of the puzzle. Canada is not free speech. Surprise. United Kingdom, given recent events in that country, definitely not free speech. You make a Twitter post about somebody that's negative, guess what? This is the government, this is the police, we're taking you, you need to come to us, you're going to jail. Like, that is the great experiment of the United States, is the free speech piece. There's a lot of other, obviously the rest of the amendments are there, but the First Amendment is free speech. And so I think you're right. I think you've hit it on the nail on the head. The arbiter is us. We are the collective arbiters. And does that sometimes go wrong? Yep, it does. Because sometimes we will collectively decide that this is the thing, and then that thing in 20 years we go, ooh, that wasn't it. And so that arbitration is continual. It is never ending. It is always a piece of the conversation, because you can't. There's no good ending with absolute arbitration from one person or a group of people, because you go from Oregon, from Washington State, and you travel across every single state in the union all the way down to New York, to Florida, to North Carolina, South Carolina, you will encounter so much different cultures and perspectives and language. You try and be an absolute arbiter over all of those 300 million Americans. There's a reason why people talk about states' rights and states having the ability to say, well, we're not going to do that. No. Do I like it? Do I think it's sometimes the states get a little too crazy? Sure. But that's the deal. We are not, because again, if the federal government was the only arbiter, God help us, we'd be in trouble. But because of the unique republic we have, the states are able to say, okay, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to have our own way of doing things. And we're going to do it differently. There's states without a sales tax. There's states without an income tax. There are states that choose to do a variation of that. There are states that choose to do, we're going to pay our workers $25 an hour. Hi, California. How's that working out for you? Like, it's not. So there's this idea of the arbitration should find a middle ground, but because we're in 2025, we don't know how to do that anymore. That's a whole other topic for a whole other podcast. But yeah, I think the arbitration is collective. And I think that piece of the contract as a culture, as a community of Americans, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten that we should all be collectively arbiters of this piece of the puzzle, where there's people who want, oh, it's my cheese. Well, that's fine for the 10 million of you, but what about for the 200 and I got to do math in my head, 280 other million people who have another idea or have a different way of doing that? There's a reason why the freedom of religion is so important in this country, because there are practicing across the spectrum of religions, from Christianity to Jewish to Muslim to Zoroastrianism to all of the things, even some Jedis, which that just makes me laugh. But it's a thing. Like, there's a Jedi religion. They've tried to found it. It's a don't ask, just nod and smile. It's a thing, right? So, but that's the power of the freedom of religion. And there's a reason why I will push back, because I've friends I haven't seen in years who are all over Facebook sometimes. They're like, we need to bring America back to a Christian nation. And it's like, oh, that is a bad idea, because then you're going to invalidate a significant population of people who practice a different religion. And what does that say? What does that mean? Like, it's very rare that I will say this, but I'm like, no, we should not be a Christian, like, theological nation. Like, that's not how that works.
We're not a
theocracy. Yeah, we're not a theocracy. I was looking for the word. Thank you. We're not a theocracy, and we never should be, and we never were. And theocracies very rarely work out very well. They eventually fall apart because you can't have a state religion. It just doesn't function. North Korea tries. Funny story, the Catholic churches in North Korea, they're not real Catholic churches. They're staffed by government-appointed priests and bishops. So it's just kind of they've got their own little rules, but that's what you get, right? You get, oh, well, we have the Catholics. Do you really? Or is it just a pretend? Is it a facade? I think it's a facade. So yeah, it's always dangerous to try and decide for one thing or the other. We should never be I said this a few minutes ago, there should never be an absolute arbiter of anything. That happens in places, and it's happening in some places, and it is really ugly to watch, because people are getting left behind. They're getting I don't want to say erased, but they're getting pushed away. Like, it's a more perfect union. We're on our way, but we're never going to be there, because we're always under construction. Yeah.
And I'll just one last thing.
No, go ahead.
And then I'll stop.
Don't stop, Julie. Keep going. Let's make it happen.
Oh my gosh, no! I think I'm winding down here. I think just the last thing that because what you just said about it is an ongoing process of more perfect.
Yeah.
And maybe we could say we're trying to get better. We're always trying to improve. And there's a lot of critiques about Plato, and I can be, I mean, when you get into the noble lie and you get into his program of eugenics and so many other things that are that we didn't even touch on.
Yeah.
But I will say, you know, and I used to think about this with Aristotle too. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the ideas, because where he was, at the root of his thought experiment was this idea that education's purpose is for moral and intellectual development, and it's to constantly further our progression, to foster critical thinking, to lead to a deeper understanding of truth. These are still relevant concepts, you know, today. And he wrote this like 3,500 years ago, that's the purpose of education. And what you just said, I mean, you know, there's still value here, and we have an awesome responsibility, all of us, not just educators, but all of us as a society, to decide who we want to be and what our culture is going to be. And education is maybe a way to help us order and understand those pieces.
Yeah. Well, in education, I've said this more times than I can count, both when I taught sixth grade and now that I'm teaching high school. Education is a super weapon. It's an absolute superpower. Because if you have if you pursue education, high school education, if you genuinely pursue it, don't just get D's for degrees. Like if you genuinely engage with the material and you genuinely try and you genuinely work to understand the complexities of the world around you through the methods and the systems and the pieces and parts of the American public school education, for the most part, because there's obviously some schools in this country that are not doing a good job. Because I don't want to say that everyone's doing a good job, because it's a mixed bag, no matter where you go. But if you take advantage of that, if you look at the possibility of getting a free, this education costs you nothing. You don't have to pay money to come into our building. You are given, and in some cases you're given free lunch. These things are given to you. That is the power of a system and a community and a country that values you as a student. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten, because the fact that we would set this all up for you, because we value you as a part of this larger community. We value what you eventually will contribute or will contribute now. We value that so much, and it's so important to us that we would give you a building to come into, to sit down, and to learn. And that you wouldn't take advantage of that you would say, whatever, I hate this. Great, you hate school. Congratulations. Not a lot of people like it. But guess what? That hate can power your desire to master it and make it your own and get through it and get on your way with whatever you want to do with the rest of your life. But there's not a lot of places you can go without that piece of paper. So you want that opportunity, you want that potential. You have to go for it. Is it great? Is it gonna be fun? Is it gonna be exciting? Is it gonna be like TikTok? Is it gonna be like YouTube? No. But that's not what school is. School is not there to entertain you. School is there to learn you, to educate you, to train you to take on the world, to think through things, to experience a challenge and go, oh, I can get through this because I got through this other thing in school and I remember this. Oh, yeah, I got this. Versus, oh, it's too tough, I quit.
And school wasn't always... we do take for granted. And your point that it's funded by our tax dollars and it's something that we adopted. Yeah. Universal public education is not all that old. Historically, it has not always been there. And it is, I take your point, Aaron, and I think we do forget that it is kind of a community gift that we're all given. And what we do with it, I mean, at least at the end of the process, we're better able to, if we don't just, as you said, go for the D's and the degrees, we're better able to think for ourselves about how we want to be in the world, what we want to do, what our place in the world is. And I hope our students feel that way.
I hope so too. The closing thing I will say is that I get stuck in the YouTube algorithm a lot. And one of the algorithms that I got stuck in was talking about how a good number of influencers, noticeable influencers on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, are leaving the influencer life and returning to 9-to-5 jobs. Because they've discovered that it is not easy to make the money they need to make. They are barely making ends meet because they are scrambling for sponsorships. They are scrambling for content. It is not a 9 to 5. It is a 6 a.m. to midnight, sometimes overnight, doing gigs, doing video work, doing projects, doing game. Like, that life is so appealing to students because they see the shiny side of it. They see Mr. Beast. I want to be the next Mr. Beast. Well, Mr. Beast has got his own issues, and he's not in great position right now. He's been in the news for some things, so don't be Mr. Beast. But any of the other content creators, they didn't just get there. Like, it was years of work, of no weekends, of no breaks, of no vacations. And yeah, did they eventually get it? But there's only one Mr. Beast, and there's a bunch of others who have either faded out or have called it quits. And there are others who, like I said, who are leaving influencer world to go work at a 9 to 5 because they're like, I need health insurance. I have a family now. I need to be able to have good, like, functional hours for my sleep. I'm not able to do this anymore. I have to be able to get back into the 9 to 5. And so this is what I want to finish on is there's no shame in a 9 to 5. There's no shame in that. And there should never be, because that sometimes is where you get started. That's sometimes where you find your career and you get yourself established and you get yourself into the scheme of things and you're able to work. That's the power of a 9 to 5 or a whatever hours you are. A regular job with regular benefits, full time, that's the aspiration. Because then you're able to do things you want to do on the weekend. If you're able to get to that point, which may take you some time depending on how you handled school and how you treated yourself to other opportunities outside of high school, be it concurrent enrollment, be it community college, be it whatever, things are going to be a lot easier for you if you work hard now. Because you're going to know what that means. When you hit the wall at a career or you hit the wall at a job, you're going to go, okay, that's a wall. I'm going to find my way around it, or I'm going to find the door that's next door here. I'm going to keep going. I'm not stopping. I'm going to be relentless in my pursuit of my future. That is the message that I want people to hear, is be relentless. Don't ever in your life think that you can't do it. If you I give up. It's too hard. It is not too hard. It can be done. There are millions upon millions of people who have been where you've been, who have done what you've done, and have gotten through it. You can, and you will. You have to choose. And that's the message I have as we close out the podcast. Anything else you want to share there, Julie?
Just be inspired by what Aaron just said. You can do this. I mean, we all need to find our way to being fulfilled, happy people who make a difference in the world in a way where we are feeling like we're not just floating, but we're feeling like we're directing our own life course, and education can help with that. Stay with it.
Yep. Hold on and keep working. All right. Well, this has been Humanity Ed. We will be back in a week with more conversation and more discussion around the idea of the humanities, literature, philosophers, and all the things. Until then, don't ever stop learning.